Thank you for joining us for this very special time. We're going to deal with the topic of grief. Now, this is going to be one portion of that topic. That is, in the sense of we're going to deal with this in different areas because grief is a topic that we want to help individuals help others, but we also want to share this very beginning portion of grief to deal with those individuals going through grief. And my goal in this program is to help them understand what they're going through. We have been the facilitator for a grief support group for 10 years or better now. And in that process, what we have discovered is there's so many people that don't really understand what grief is all about. As a matter of fact, that's one of the values of the grief support group. What we do there, it's not a time of instruction, but it's a time of individuals sharing what they're feeling and so forth and what they're going through. Now, the value of that, there's two values of a grief support group. The value of that is that someone will share what they're feeling, and then I can identify, okay, then there's nothing wrong with me if I feel this way. If I go through this feeling of depression, if I go through this feeling of anger, there's nothing wrong with me then. It's all right to feel this way because that's part of the grieving process. And that helps individuals understand what they're going through. So as individuals share and I identify with what they're sharing, that can be a help to me. Now, the other side of that coin is another thing that I find the grief support group can do for me is we want everybody to share. And so when I share, maybe I can say something that will help someone else. And the value of that to me would be the idea that, okay, I feel this pain, I feel this agony, but it's been a help to someone. And so this is a concept of sharing in a grief support group. But what I have found out is that many times that we've done this, I have found out there are so many people. We never know how many are coming to the group. We don't ask anybody to call ahead or anything like that. We just make our appearance there and wait for individuals to come. But what I find is as individuals come back and forth different times, sometimes I had some that came for a year or two, and I've had others that came once or twice, and some spasmodically. It's all up to the individual because I find that one of the problems is individuals sometimes don't feel they can share that grief right now in this circumstance. Or maybe something, while they plan to be there, maybe something happens that triggers something and say, okay, I was planning to go, but I just don't feel I can go today, and stuff like that. But what I have found out is as these individuals come back and forth at different times and brand new individuals, as far as the group is concerned, I find that they don't know what to expect. They're wondering, is it okay to be this way? Is it okay to be that way? Let me make a statement right off from the very beginning. Okay, I say this over and over and over again. The way you handle your grief, the way you deal with the grief and so forth, the way you find comfort in your grief. What I need to tell you and what you need to know is that it's okay as long as you're not hurting yourself or someone else. Okay? As long as you're not hurting yourself or someone else, the way you deal with your grief, if it brings you comfort, if it brings you help, then it's okay. It's okay. But now when we get to the place when I say hurting yourself or someone else, one of the things that we will talk about here is anger and grief. Now, when that anger takes over, it's I hurt, want you to hurt, and we say and do hurting things, and sometimes we just want to let that anger out. And yes, we need to get the anger out, but we need to find a positive way to get it out rather than hurt other people. And when we hurt other people, especially when we're going through grief, it seems like time afterwards and so forth, when I realize the damage I did or the hurt that I did to someone else, now I'm hurting myself. I wish I hadn't done that and so forth. And we will talk about those different feelings or emotions and what some call stages of grief. I don't like that term, and I'll explain it to you later when we get to that point. But when we start talking about these feelings of grief and so forth, what I'm trying to do now in this particular program is to help you understand that what you're feeling, as long as you're not hurting yourself or someone else, it's okay. You can go through these things. These are things that you have to face. Okay? And with this in mind, let me share this with you. Grief is a journey. And the only way to deal with grief is to go through it. To go through it. Okay? So with this in mind, I want you to realize that the best way you can help anybody with dealing with grief is to journey with them. In our counseling for over the years, the best thing that we could do for anyone going through grief was to listen to what they've got to say. If you're going to help individuals, and we're going to be talking about that later in the sense of setting up programs and sharing how to share programs and put programs together to help others. But right now in this program, I just want to talk to those individuals that are going through the grieving process to let you know that what you're feeling is okay. If you're not hurting yourself or someone else, the way you deal with it, the way you bring your comfort, that's going to be okay. Again, I got to tell you, one thing that I will not share with you here, I will not tell you is, I won't tell you I understand what you're going through. My understanding is that this is one of the most offensive statements that you could say to a grieving person. I understand what you're going through. The feedback that I get from those individuals is, you can't understand. And the reality is, you can't. You can't understand. But the other side of that coin is, I would like to understand. I would be willing to listen to whatever you've got to share. I want to journey with you, and that's the value of looking at grief as a journey. I want to journey with you to help you as you go through these difficult times. But I don't understand what you're facing. I don't understand what you're going through because everybody's different. Every circumstance is different. And we're going to share some different aspects of grief here to help you realize why these things are so different for each one. And again, why you can't say, and even if you've been through the grieving process, even if you face the losses yourself, you can't say, well, I understand your loss. And we'll see that in a moment or so as to why we can't totally say, I understand what you're going through, because everybody's loss is different. It's how they see it and so forth that makes it different. Well, with that in mind, then, I would like to go to deal with this particular subject of grief. Let me tell you about the word grief. The word grief is a rather new term, okay? Now, I know it's decades old, but originally there were so many different feelings that came with grief. Okay, we're going to be talking about the idea of some of those feelings, stages of grief. I have a problem with that word, the grief cycle and stages of grief. I don't like those terms. Why? Because they imply that if I move from stage 1 to stage 2, I'll be doing okay. It doesn't work that way. I can work my way through one of the emotions, and the stages have to do with different emotions. I can work my way through one of the emotions and say, okay, that's behind me, go to another, then another trigger hits me and I'm right back to square one. That's one of the most confusing things I find about people facing grief. When they think that, okay, I've crossed the bridge, as it were, I've moved to another stage, and then boom, I'm right back. A trigger happens, something reminds me of something, and I go right back to it. Okay, so we want you to realize then that the stages of grief are just a word, and the grief cycle, that's another thing we want to talk about. Grief cycle suggests that this moves in cycles. It doesn't. I can have all of those feelings and emotions of grief all at once. I can work through them and think that I've really got it, and then boom, they all back again. Something triggers it. So if you feel like you have really conquered something, and you feel like you're really making accomplishments, and I'm doing good with this grief, and then all of a sudden, someday you find yourself right back where you were before. You find yourself right back at what would call the beginning stages. It's like, that's normal. That's normal. It's not unusual to have that happen. And you don't have to beat yourself up to think, and this is what often happens. We beat ourselves up with guilt to think, oh, there must be something wrong with me. I had this all behind me before, but now here I am going through it again. That is the way it works. Now, let me talk to you about the different, okay, I use that word stages, and I'm only using that to suggest some of the feelings and emotions that individuals go through. But with this concept, let me just mention those stages. Okay, some would call shock or denial as a stage. Okay, and one of the beginning, quote unquote, beginning stages. Here we go again. I don't like it because of that, because, okay, it doesn't have to happen in the beginning. It can happen years later. I can go right back to it and start all over. Incidentally, let me suggest to you, we've said grief is a journey, but it's also something that you never get over. When you talk about loss, you never get over. You see, grief is not about death. Grief is about loss. Do you get me there? Grief is not about death. Grief is about loss. And loss is an event that causes things to be forever different. Now, let's talk about death then. The death of a loved one is a loss. And things will be forever different. Okay? That loved one is not going to be around anymore. That loved one isn't there when I want them the most. That loved one, especially now when I'm going through these grieving, hurtful experiences, I want to share it with my loved one, but I can't because they're not there. Things are forever different there. Now, one of the problems about this, too, and makes grief even more complicated, is we don't always know the things that are going to be different right away. Oh, I can imagine this won't be the same anymore, and that won't be the same. But what happens is sometimes later in life, sometimes maybe 6 months later, a year later, something else comes. One of the things that we do in our program and in our seminars is we try between Thanksgiving and Christmas, we try to do a seminar on holiday grief. Because all of a sudden we've been planning this and we've been, okay, things are going to be different now. But then when Christmas comes and you've got, well, you see, the holidays are about memories. And the grief is about losses that'll never be the same again. And so now I've got memories of things that'll never be the same. And so, again, this is why we try to do this in holidays, to help people find ways to deal with it. And we will, before we get through, we'll put together a segment on holiday grief because it's such a difficult time. But with that, again, here's the concept is, okay, it's been 6 months now. I should be doing good, and then a holiday, an anniversary, a birthday or something triggers everything, and wow, that day we're right back to square one. So I'm trying to say this in the sense of letting you know that you're all right if you have good days and bad days, and that's the way it's described. That's one of the goals of the grieving process. We have good days and bad days, and the goal is that we would eventually have more good days than bad days. But don't ever think that the bad days are forever gone. For indeed, they are there forever. And one of the problems is we keep discovering something that is different, something that won't be the same anymore, something that we anticipated in the planning for the future, but suddenly now when we face that, maybe we totally forgot about it, but now here's that plan we had for the future, and now we realize, oh, this isn't the way we planned it. He or she is not here with me now. So this is what makes grief so very difficult. Again, the fact that you're discovering from day to day, from week to week, from year to year, discovering something new that won't be the same anymore. And it's like the grief coming all back again. So if you're facing that and going through that and different anniversaries of events or different things unfolding that you were anticipating or planning for, don't feel that there's something wrong with you because you woke up that morning and you're having a horrible day and you're right back to square one in your grieving process. Don't feel there's something wrong with you. That's the way grief works. And we need for you to understand that so that you know that you're okay. You're just dealing with a situation and a difficulty that you can't change. And you're just discovering things that you can no longer change or no longer make it like it was. Again, grieving is about loss. And loss is an event where things will never be the same again. Let me share some things that would cause loss then. Okay? You see, when I say grief is not about death, it's about loss, well then there's multitudes of other things that can cause loss in our life. We've been working on a book lately on the subject of helping children, dealing with the subject of grief. And one of the things that I find in our world is that parents want to protect their children from grief. It cannot be done. Okay? It cannot be done. Let me explain to you. When we see grief, again, about things that'll be forever different. My grandson graduated from kindergarten. And he went on to first grade. And now that's something to celebrate, right? Now wait a minute. But wait a minute, it's the idea, wait a minute, things will be forever different. When that next fall, after the summer was over, when he went back to school, he had bonded with that kindergarten teacher, but She was not his teacher anymore. Had a different teacher. And he had some friends in that class, but they went to a different first grade than his. So what have we got? Things that are different. There's actually a grieving process. Can I suggest to you that every time a child moves from one grade to another, there are events and there are things that are caused to be forever different, and there's a grieving process. Now, that doesn't mean that we need to fear life for the children or we need to isolate them. No. What it means is you don't protect them from these losses. You don't protect them from this grief, but you use it to help them. You use it to help them face the challenge of grief. You talk them through it. It's a journey for them, too. What about the idea of graduating from high school? Now, I'm going to be totally honest with you. I've got probably close to 10 years of college education. But when I was a kid, I wanted to quit high school at 16, and my parents wouldn't let me. Okay? That's to say, I didn't really like school when I was a kid. But it's kind of interesting. When I got to that graduation ceremony, I can still remember we stood in a long hallway, the graduating class, where people could come down and congratulate us as they walked by. And I can still remember fighting the tears back. As much as I disliked that, I suddenly realized we won't be coming back to this high school for classes anymore. We won't be going through this routine anymore. So again, you've got this change that takes place where things are forever different. It's a beautiful thing to go off to college, isn't it? I can still remember there were times in college when I struggled with homesickness and so forth, or another form of grief, because guess what? It's not the same anymore. So again, the whole picture is even pleasant things. Here's one for you. How about marriage? That's right. The wedding ceremony is exciting. The vows have been exchanged. The gifts have been received. The thank you cards are going out. And then 6 months later, and we've faced this too in marriage counseling too. 6 months later, suddenly, why do I feel this way? Battling with depression. Depression is part of the grieving process. Okay, so here I am battling with depression when indeed this was a great time. But wait a minute. When you are married, that change says things are forever different. Okay? They should be to a certain extent. Well, yes, you might have some of the same friends, but you don't follow the same routines anymore. What you are now is a couple, and hopefully you're bonding together and moving together in a different avenue of life. And so things are different. And yes, I can warn you that even with something as beautiful as marriage and a home, there's going to be a time when you struggle with your emotions. There's going to be a time when some of the feelings of grief are there to bother you. Remember, I said that grief was a rather new term. Now, I want to call that to your attention because what happens now is it's beautiful to have that term because when I go through those different emotions, the anger, the shock, the loneliness, the depression, the guilt, when I go through those, if I attach it to the idea of my experience of grief, then I can say, okay, that's why I feel this way. One of the biggest struggles with emotion is wondering, why do I feel this way? Why am I going through this? And it bothers us. We feel depressed because there's something wrong with us. And that's why I want to share these thoughts with you, because there's nothing wrong. It's a natural part of the grieving process. But as you look at it, now we've got the label of grief on it, so that means then I know why I'm dealing with this anger. I know why I'm struggling with this guilt. I know why I've got a battle with depression. I know why this loneliness is there. We can relate to it if we can identify the cause. And it always is helpful to be able to label the cause. And that's what's important about understanding grief, to understand the cause of why I'm going through this and so forth. So when we look at it, this is one of the problems that a lot of people face when they don't know what causes grief. The things that are forever different. Again, the whole idea in a marriage relationship and 6 months later and so forth, everything is, it's not what I thought it was and all of this, and emotions start to enter into it in a negative way. Okay, it's a natural part of a change of your life where things are not the same anymore. And what you learn to do is to deal with them in a positive way. Any grief, the way that you're going to overcome it. Okay, I told you that you do not get through with grief. Okay, you don't get through this. It's something you work at all your life. But the way that you deal with it is getting stronger every day. I heard one individual, she had been through quite a bit of grief, I guess, and over the years, and she made the statement, it will get easier. And I had to challenge that statement. The statement was made in one of our grief support groups, and I had to challenge that statement. It's not that the grief gets easier, it's that you get stronger. You see, the grieving process and the healing that comes from it is not getting over it. The healing that comes from it is getting stronger each day. Learning to deal with the things that are forever different. Getting stronger with the way that I deal with those different things. That's the healing process. It's not getting over it, but it's adjusting to the things that are forever different. Let's go back to your child then, as he moves from classroom to classroom, as he moves from out of class and into college and so forth. Your child is learning to deal with things, a new classroom, new classmates, he makes new friends and so forth. He adjusts to a new teacher. All of these things are part of adjusting. And it needs to be identified in that way. And so dealing with losses in your life that makes life forever different, the way to find healing is to find how you can adjust, how you can reach out and find strength in those moments where this is now forever different. How can I adjust to that difference and so forth. So knowing it and dealing with it is what's going to get you through this. You'll not get over it. I don't have to say that too many times. You're not going to get over it, but you can get stronger as you learn to deal with each one. And then as you look to the future, and incidentally, looking to the future can be a horrible part of the grieving process, because we look at the things that won't be the same. More grief. We look at the things that we feel are going to be so difficult. Anticipatory grief. We won't talk much about that now, but eventually we will. As we go through this whole program and series. Anticipatory grief, things that I'm looking to the future and I'm anticipating how bad it's going to be. One of the things I found out about anticipatory grief, it's usually not as bad as we thought. This is one of the things we will share when it comes time to dealing with grief in the holidays. It's usually not as bad as we thought. But it's getting used to these changes, getting used to these things that will be forever different, that makes me stronger and stronger each day. So with this, let's go on to see some of these things that causes this grief. Okay, how about the loss of a job? You're used to getting up in the morning and going to work, and at work you've got the same crew around you and all of this, and suddenly you lost your job. There's no reason to get up in the morning, and now you've got to, first of all, okay, and let's look at some of the other losses connected with that. Okay, and we're going to get to that in just a moment or so too, about the losses upon losses. Needs that aren't met because of the losses. Again, this is a picture of what you're struggling with when you're going through the grieving process. So a job that's no longer there. Wow, why am I feeling so depressed? Why am I struggling with it? That's part of the grieving process. And again, we need to get active and get to the place where we can deal with this and work our ways through this and find a new job and all that. But you need to know that these are feelings that are going to be there. Don't let them control you. But at the same time, there's nothing wrong with you when you face those dealings. Now, when I say the loss of a job, here's one that a lot of people don't realize. Retirement. Wow. People look forward to retirement when they don't have to get up and struggle with work and all that stuff, and they can sit home and relax and don't have to set the alarm clock. But one of the things that you will find out is life will be forever different. You will not all retire at the same time, that is you and your friends, and so that relationships will fall by the wayside. Loss. Again, there's a feeling of the income and the regular checks. Loss. So things are different, and you need to realize when you go into, there's a lot of buildings and programs, organizations and programs that are designed to help individuals prepare for retirement because they'll be basically put on a shelf. I'm not needed anymore. All of these things are about loss. All of these things are about the idea of not being able to do the same things that I always did and all of this. Let me take a few others. Okay, the loss of health. That was a huge message for me when I discovered there's a lot of things that I couldn't do anymore. I love to hunt, and when I can't climb the hills anymore, it makes a huge difference in hunting in Pennsylvania. when I find myself as struggling with getting up in the morning and all these medicines I've got, wow, I suddenly realized, and this was something that I was working the grief support group when I had this setback in my health, and it's like, wow, this is something that would be forever different, and I felt the grief of it. While I was listening to others share their grief, I realized that I've got a grieving process too. And it's interesting to realize that how you handle that will also make a difference. Because if I then feel, why am I feeling this way, and I've got all kinds of questions and I worry about it, the bottom line with it is I'm only going to add to my grief. So it's a normal thing to feel with the loss of your health, a grieving process, because things will be forever different. A hospital stay. What happens if we work as a chaplain in the hospital? The grief support group that I work with is one connected with the UPMC Altoona Hospital. So what happens when a person goes to the hospital? Well, if I was thirsty at home, I would get up in the middle of the night and go out to the refrigerator and get a glass of milk. In the hospital, when I get thirsty, I have to push a button and wait for somebody to come. Again, the whole idea of losing communication. What's happening at home? Who's watering the plants? Who's taking care of the children? Who's in charge of this and that and so forth? Is everything going good? Again, the idea of the loss of information, the loss of the contact with the people at home. How sad it is when we realize, and I had one situation once where an individual, I had met her before. I had seen her in the hospital setting before. But this one time I got a call to go to her bedside late at night. And when I got there, I recognized the person and remembered being with her before. But the other time that they were in the hospital, there was a husband there. But in the meantime, she lost her husband. And here she's laying in the darkness of the night in that hospital room, and her husband won't be coming to visit her. This won't be anybody to talk over the problems that the doctor relates to. She's got to deal with them herself now. Again, things are forever different. And there's a grieving process that goes through the hospital stay just because things are forever different. How about the loss of a home? Again, life is different. Moving out of your home into a retirement community. Moving out of your home because you can't afford it, and moving into an apartment because you can't keep up the home. All of these are changes. And again, I don't really have to go into details on this, but simply to let you know, again, that changes are there, and those changes bring grief. And again, one of the most painful is that of divorce. Divorce, where things will never be the same again. We won't take the time in this program, but we do a program on the subject of children of divorce and how grief affects the child in divorce. Things that will be forever different. The losses that a child faces when mom and dad break up the home. Indeed, it's a pathetic situation. And incidentally, I'm not saying that divorce should never be, because sometimes a dysfunctional home will cause that same grief, because the child never knows what's going to be expected. Never knows when there's arguing and there's fighting, the two people that they love the most are hurting each other and they don't know what to do with it. That's going to cause grief to them because they can't control it. It's things that are different. Indeed, all of these things, and I'm just going to let you now go with your own imagination as to what you can see as a change. And when I say go to your own imagination, take the time to sit down and consider all the changes that have happened to your life in the past year. That's right. The changes that have happened to your life in the past year, and see how many of them are things that have caused you grief. One of the emotions of the grief that's there because you've gone through a loss. You've gone through a grieving process. Again, with all of this, let me talk just a little bit about, I want to talk about the needs that are lost and so forth, but I want to talk about the idea of the many different emotions of grief. We have our notes here. That's why I keep looking down here. I want to make sure we include all of this because I want you to get a picture of what the grief is like. So with this, someone has put together this stages of grief, or this cycle of grief. And really all it is these individuals, probably the most famous one is Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. But there's many of them, and really all they've done is to observe people going through grief. and observing them going through the grieving process and what they felt by way of emotions. And so with that in mind, it's like, no, this isn't a hard-clad, carved in stone, this is the way you're going to be. And I challenge that every time someone wants to say, well, you should be doing this, you should be doing that. When people offer instructions in a grieving process, you should do this, you should do that, I'm saying, you don't know what you're talking about. I'm saying with all of this, there goes the problem that you're facing, that again, the whole picture is you don't know what you're really talking about. You don't know how to deal with this grief, and you don't want to tell people you should do this, you should do that. Indeed, with the whole concept, and let's talk about some of these feelings, some of these emotions. One of the feelings then is the feeling of shock or denial. Shock or denial. Some would like to say, oh, that's in the beginning stages. No, I have discovered that time and again that denial will come the next year. Or okay, let me put it to you this way. When I face something that is forever different. When I face something, okay, here's a new thing that's different to me. I might now go right to that stage of shock and denial. Oh, this can't be happening to me. How did this happen? And so forth. Okay, so the concept is that the shock and denial might have been in the first stage, might have been the first thing you faced when, I want to wake up from this dream, and that's what it's about. This is a nightmare, and we're going to wake up from it. I got to get over this nightmare. But the problem with all of that is we know that it's not a nightmare. We know that it's ongoing, and while we struggle with the denial, and it takes a while to get through it, okay, when we get through it, okay, that's behind me. I got to the next stage, quote unquote stage. I got to the next stage. No, because there's going to be some times when that shock and denial will come back again. That's why I don't like that term, stage. So when you feel that denial and say, oh, this can't be, this isn't going to happen. Well, why is this? Why am I going through this? And all of that are forms of shock and denial. There's another one called anger, obviously. There's people that become angry at the spouse that they've lost, angry at the person who has died and left them behind. There are people that become angry with God, and there are people that become angry with themselves. I should have done this. I should have done that. Now let's take this again, trying to understand these emotions. There's another emotion of guilt. Let's put the two together, anger and guilt. Angry with myself because I didn't do this. I didn't insist they go to the doctor. I didn't make sure that this was taken care of. I forced them to get out on the road in that bad weather. All of these things, they're angry with themselves. They're angry with the individual. They're angry with God. Anger wants to take over. I had an individual deal with sharing in one of our grief support groups, and she was noting the fact that she was talking to her son in a very negative way, and she was just not happy with who she had come to be. This anger is taking over. It is part of the grieving process. Now remember what I said. As long as you're not hurting yourself or someone else, when that anger gets to the point where it hurts someone else, or going to hurt themselves too. Because you see, what's going to happen there is if that anger isn't properly vented, you're going to destroy yourself physically. That anger can cause all kinds of physical problems if it's not vented in the right way. So again, here's a case where I need to learn with it. Learn how to overcome it. Learn how to let the anger out in a positive way. And again, we have a program in one of our other segments that we're sharing there is anger management. And it's very important. You might want to turn to that one because it's very important to understand how to get that anger out in a positive way so you're not hurting yourself by keeping it in or hurting others by venting it in the wrong way. Again, that anger, when it takes over, it has one philosophy. See, anger is a secondary emotion. It starts from hurt and turns to an anger. Still good as long as the anger's not in control. When the anger's in control, remember, it started with a hurt. So what happens is it's I hurt, want you to hurt, I say hurting things, I do hurting things. It's all about hurting someone else and dealing with my anger and getting it out. But I'm also hurting myself in the process. Do you realize again the whole picture of what these emotions can do for us and to us? So with this in mind, then we've got to realize that we need to deal with that anger. Again, this is something that will be forever different. And again, I need to deal with it so I don't self-destruct. Another one we've already mentioned, the guilt process, but many people struggle with guilt, wishing they could turn the clock back, wishing they could do something differently, and they struggle with the guilt. Again, we got to find ways, and this is what your grief support group is all about. This is what grief counseling is all about, trying to find help with dealing with these individual emotions. But what I'm trying to tell you is not so much that I'm going to tell you, you do this, you did this, and so forth. No, what I want to tell you is these are feelings that are part of the grieving process, so don't think there's something wrong with you when those feelings are there. Yes, you're going to need to deal with them. Bargaining is another one. Sometimes we find that even after we've lost the loved one or the loss of our job or whatever, if we can find some way to bargain, if we can find some way, maybe if I do this, it'll all turn around. Maybe, and again, I know it's not rational thinking, but that's the problem when they're going through a grieving process. It's not always rational thinking. We want to bargain our way through situations. If I do this, maybe it'll change everything and all of that. The changes have been made. Things will be forever different, and it's part of the grieving process. Okay, depression. I want to talk about that one. We've got a whole segment on the subject of overcoming depression. I challenge you to look at that on this YouTube as well. Overcoming depression. I mentioned there are 7 healthy things that you can do to overcome depression. Look into that. Take the challenge of doing those 7 healthy things, because this is what you call a secondary depression. The grief is what's causing it. So it's a secondary depression. As you deal with your grief, you can also deal with the depression. And you need to deal with the depression too, so that you can deal with your grief. There's where you're going to find the part of getting stronger and stronger and stronger and overcoming the grief and overcoming the depression. Not getting over it. Please don't misunderstand those terms. Overcoming means I will get through it, I will make it work for me, I will get stronger. It's not a matter of getting over it. It's a matter of getting stronger each day. Now with that, there's also finally a notation, and I say finally because, again, if you're talking stages, we're going to get to this point where we finally arrived, and that is acceptance. It's another emotion dealing with the grief. Acceptance. I accept the situation I'm in. But really, the picture is, what have I accepted? For some people, they deal with the struggle of, I don't deserve to have a spouse. I lost my spouse. I didn't take care of him or her, and I don't deserve to have a spouse. If you accept that, then you've got a problem, okay? How about the idea of self-esteem? I'm not worthy to have a parent. I'm not worthy to have a mom and dad. Those going through divorce, and especially children of divorce, destroys the self-esteem. So with this, then, if I accept the idea that I don't deserve it, I'm not worthy, then I'm self-destructive. Indeed, what you accept is very important. But acceptance is probably what you want to reach for, but it's what you accept that makes a difference. And how you handle all of these other emotions, will determine what you accept. And you need to be very careful accepting, okay, with regards to your self-esteem and your feelings about who you are and what your life is all about and the meaning of your life. See, that's another challenge. Things that'll be forever different is the meaning of your life. Why am I here? Why do I have to go through this? And so forth. So the bottom line with all of this is you got to get to the place where you need to realize these are part of the emotions, and I need to learn to deal with those emotions, to overcome those emotions, and that's what's going to make me stronger. Dealing with the triggers that cause them and dealing with the particular emotions and not letting them destroy me, but finding my strength in dealing with them. Again, with all of this, I'm just trying to lay this out that you can better understand what you're feeling and why you're feeling that way. I'm not saying that I understand what you're feeling. I'm not saying that I know what you're going through. I'm saying that I want you to understand what you're going through. I want you to because you're the only one that's going through that particular grief, even if you've got 2 individuals. Okay, let's look at it this way. You've got 2 family members that have lost the one loved one, but each one relates to them differently. And you cannot say, I understand to each other, because your relationship is different. Here's one that really becomes an interesting factor. You see, if I want to understand what a person's going through in grief, what I really need to do is to understand the relationship that they had with this person they've lost. or the relationship they had with the job, or the relationship in the divorce and so forth, in the home setting. Whatever's causing the grief, I need to try to understand the relationship. Now, there's the huge challenge, because I can never get to the place where I understand, because in each case, I'm going to see it from my perspective, not from their perspective. Let's look at this one. A little boy loses his grandfather. A little boy loses his grandfather. Well, that's a natural part of life, and so he'll get over it. Wait a minute. Who was the grandfather to that little boy? Maybe the grandfather was one who showed up for his birthday every year and was there at Christmas time. Or what happens if that grandfather was the one that picked him up after school, watched him until mom and dad got out of work? What happens if the grandfather was the one that went to every one of his ball games? Are you seeing a relationship now? Now, what happens then when that little boy goes to the ball game and his grandfather's not sitting in the bench anymore? What happens if he's now wondering who's going to pick me up from school anymore? And how about this picking up from school? There's a whole lot of talk that goes on between grandson and grandfather. Who's going to listen to me anymore? You see what I'm talking about? The loss is definitely going to make a difference. And I cannot tell you how much that loss is. So therefore, I cannot tell you I understand what you're going through. What I'm simply trying to say, if you want to help an individual understand, if you want to try to understand, you need to try to understand the relationship. You need to try to understand what they're experiencing, what has happened, what the real loss is all about. I'd like to take a moment before we conclude this segment and go over Abraham Maslow's hierarchy of need. Okay? Abraham Maslow, famed psychologist, now deceased, created a hierarchy of need. He said every human being has these 7 basic needs. He put it in a pyramid fashion. And these on the bottom were foundational, and they built up to the top. Least important, so forth, up to the top. Now, with this in mind, again, his role, and again, it's kind of hard to say which is the least important, because it's up to the individual, how he sees that importance, how she sees that importance. But with this in mind, we've got this pyramid of needs. And so if we're going to understand the loss, how many needs are lost because of the loss? Okay? So let's say and it's basically what we said here about the child who loses the grandfather. Let's say we're talking about the death of a loved one. One of the 7 basic needs, the foundational need, is that of physical needs. The roof over my head, the food on my table. Okay? The idea of daily supplies. In some cases for children, it's the school they go to, and all of these that's their physical world. But what happens when this loss changes all of that? What happens when the loss is maybe the father or the breadwinner is the one that's lost? And now we can't afford to keep this house, so we've got to move to another house. We've got to move to an apartment. Oh, but this little boy had a pet. But wait a minute, in an apartment we can't have a pet anymore. Who's lost? What is now forever different? Again, with the whole concept as this child moves on and progresses, maybe moving to this apartment means he moves away from his classroom, his playmates. He's got to go to a new school district. You see the losses? Or the spouse in this situation. Yes, they've lost a loved one, but what were the other losses? Let's say then that the loss was the breadwinner. Then where's the security? That's the next step in Maslow's list. Every human being needs to feel they're secure. But after this loss, I recall working with individuals that just didn't know how to trust, because this event happened and so forth. Everything was planned. It was going good, and all of a sudden, bang, lost several family members in an accident. Now trying to make plans for themselves to do this activity, to make this vacation, and all of these things. It's like, I can't even be sure that tomorrow will be the same. Who is the next one I'm going to lose? Children going through divorce, this is one of the huge problems they struggle with. Who's going to leave me next? What's going to happen to me here? Where is my security? So again, you've got to realize the importance of considering what this loss has meant. This loss now talking about needs that are unmet. There's acceptance needs and needs to belong. So the whole idea, and here's what I've found many times, when a person loses their spouse, they lose those friends that they used to communicate with. Wait a minute. Okay, they used to travel in couples. They used to do things in couples. But they don't do it anymore because the one couple is uncomfortable because maybe the husband is missing, and so her husband doesn't want to go over there, afraid to, and what I find too many times is afraid that they're going to ask questions we can't answer. They're uncomfortable with the idea of they're feeling their grief, and they're uncomfortable with the idea that when they get together, it's only going to be reminding of their grief, so they want to avoid it. And so now we've lost companionship. Children who lose parents, who go through divorce. One of the big problems, where do they fit in school? I've seen an individual, an adult, when he would come to the church where I was pastoring, and he would say, go to the social programs and all, and no longer sat with the couples, sat with the young people, and the age difference was quite a bit. But again, this was the only way he felt he fitted in, not with the couples anymore because his spouse wasn't with him anymore. This is the picture then of loss, acceptance, esteem needs. Okay, the importance of self-esteem. Maybe I'm not deserving to have a father. Maybe I'm not deserving to have a spouse. Maybe I don't deserve it. Maybe this is my fault. One of the biggest problems of going through grief is we want a challenge to say, what did I do wrong? What did I do wrong? And that surely, there's your guilt part. The two greatest deterrents to good self-esteem is guilt and shame. And when I struggle with the guilt of grief, that's part that destroys me. That's part that defeats me. And so it's one more loss. I need to feel good about myself, but I can't feel good when I see all these losses. And then when I get these new reminders thinking, okay, I'm coming through this and I'm going to make it, and then boom, I'm back to square one, more self-esteem. Must be something wrong with me. The importance then of reaching out to others. And incidentally, let me say that when we talk about these grief support groups and grief counselors and so forth, let me suggest to you, you don't keep this inside. You've got to talk about it. You've got to share it. Because in sharing it, number one, you're still talking about that loved one and you want to keep that memory alive. But number two is you're getting those feelings out. In the process, maybe you'll find and discover ways to deal with it more, especially if you're dealing with other people going through something similar. But again, the picture and the bottom line is don't keep it inside, share it. Because if you keep it inside, there's where you wrestle with the thoughts. What did I do to deserve this? What's wrong with me? And so with all of this, there goes my self-esteem. Another need that Maslow mentions on his list is the need to know and understand. And this I find so many times as part of the grieving cycle. If indeed it's a loss of a loved one, but maybe even the loss of a job. Okay, I don't understand. I was doing good work, I was producing, I was even doing better than this fellow, but he's still on the job, but I'm not. Or I don't know what caused my loved one to die. I've heard individuals struggle with those feelings. Oh, you got medical terminology, but the average person doesn't understand this. And so with this, then, they struggle with the understanding. I don't know. I don't understand. If I could done, what could I have done differently in all of this? And really, not knowing makes me think that I should have done this, I should have done that, and so forth. Bottom line with all of this is you've got to realize that it's part of a need that's not being met. When you total these up, it's like, wow, I like to look at the plate, grief like a plate, and it's getting fuller and fuller and fuller. Yes, you've got the loss of a loved one, and then you've got the losses that are coming afterwards as you deal with each one of these things. It's not going to be the same. And then you look at these individual things that is part of my life, that is part of a necessary healthy living and emotional living, and bit by bit your plate's getting fuller and fuller. Fulfillment needs, there's an important one. Fulfillment needs, that is the need to be needed. The need to be needed. So with that, we talk about the idea that we cared for our loved one, especially if our loved one was sick and we were the caregiver in this case. Okay, we cared for them. We wanted to do things for them and all of this, but now suddenly they're not there for us to care for them anymore. Now suddenly all of that sacrifice and that giving that I made to take care of them, even the whole idea of the spouse that is the provider, and suddenly they're not needed to provide anymore because they've lost their spouse. Again, this is something they need to be needed, and suddenly that thing is on a new plate here, okay? It's getting more and more grief building up in there. Again, aesthetic needs is the last one he mentions in his list. And incidentally, after Maslow died, they added some things to his list. And that's probably significant because life changes for all of us. But with this, the aesthetic needs, the appreciation of beauty. It's amazing how many people don't realize the things that they used to enjoy so much they don't enjoy anymore. The things that emotionally excited them, it just doesn't feel good anymore. And the problem with all of that too is when we go back to this idea of thinking and planning and all of this, these are plans that we've shot for. These are plans that we've tried to reach out to. But we don't dare reach out anymore. We can't even trust that tomorrow will be the same. And so therefore, we can't get emotionally involved in making these kind of plans. The whole picture is that there's a loss and an emptiness and a void in our life. Now, again, I want to take the time to deal with this in a more advanced way of sharing some things that you can do. And I'm not here to say, you do this, you do that. And when I share some of these things, it's not about, it's going to be working with those individuals that want to help individuals go through this. And I'll try to share that. But one of the things you'll hear me saying over and over again, you're not there to understand, to instruct, or all of this. You're there to listen. You're there to listen. If you can grasp what they're saying, then, well, we'll share that when the time comes of how you can let them know that you're hearing them and you're grasping it. But don't ever think that you're ready to say, I understand what you're going through. I understand that this is painful and all that. No, you don't understand. Don't ever use that terminology because that's like a knife piercing to the heart, to the individual that's facing things that they don't understand themselves, and you're going to tell me that you understand it? It doesn't work that way. So what I've done now is simply to share some ideas of what it's like to go through the grieving process. And I haven't touched the whole surface. I'm just trying to share some things that'll make you realize that there's nothing wrong with you. If you're feeling these feelings, if you've got these thoughts and this negative stuff that you're going through, there's nothing wrong with thinking and feeling this way. It is part of the grieving process. But plan to check back on with us again in the next segment and talk more and more about this idea of finding the healing process. Thank you so much for giving us these moments together, and I hope they've been beneficial to you. You take care now. Goodbye.